this one is probably the one that I'm maybe the most interested in, because it also involves a bit of business. It also involves my personal cultural shock coming from Romania to UK and seeing how different emotions are expressed in those two cultures. So, yeah. What do you think?
What did you notice when you came from Romania to the UK? What did you notice?
The stereotypical thought, I would say, of Romanians and people from maybe South and Eastern Europe coming to UK and to the more Germanic cultures, as Germany and the Northern countries as well, is that they are cold. They just say they are cold people. But that is very shallow. When you get into it a bit, obviously, you would hit this affective or neutral cultures. But now, for me personally, it was, I didn't understand why would they not express themselves.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it. There would also be many cultures where to demonstrate emotion is seen as losing control, right? Like, so the idea is there's a higher value placed on being calm, having a calm demeanor, being able to express different points of view, in a calm way. So going back to the high context communication, how do I express it in a different way? Whereas in other cultures, the idea of communications is to be fully expressed. Use your hands, use your face. I mean, use gestures to tell the stories, because that also engages the listener in different ways. So again, it's what is an accepted view of that particular culture. So cultures which are have a higher, what I call a higher level of emotion, more emotive cultures, are also tend to be far more expressive. Less emotive, less expressions.
But why? Because you hear this a lot in the Western cultures. Why do you think because at the end of the expressing emotion is seen as vulnerability and it's seen as weakness. Why would that happen?
Well, I think it's seen as weakness so it's very contextual, right, Stefan? Mm-hmm. So if you think about in the past, and traditionally, we look at exposing, when we talk about vulnerability, as being a sign of weakness, because of, again, you think of that culture whether it's much more masculine. Whereas if you look at the new ways of work, if you look at all the latest work, say, from the people like Brené Brown, who's written about vulnerability. You talk about leaders, good leaders demonstrating vulnerability, because in today's world, if you're leading any organization, any team, the reality is your team members probably know more than you, right? Like, it is not possible for you as a leader to be across everything. If you're running a global team, in multiple countries, how do you know what's happening on the ground in another part of the world, right? So you need to be able to demonstrate vulnerability. You need to be able to say, now, I think it's completely reasonable for leaders to say, actually, I don't know the response to that, right? I don't know the answer to that. How do we find out? Who do we need to talk to, right? Because you can find there's data, and there's information, and there's knowledge, right? So if you think of that as a hierarchy, there's loads of data around, there's lots of information around, or you can Google anything, right? But then it's like, what do I do with that information to make it into knowledge, right? Which is fine. But really the key is, how do I utilize that knowledge to create insights? Now, insights requires a level of experience. Insight requires wisdom. Insight requires pattern recognition. And sometimes you don't know when you're doing something, how it will come into play years later, right? Yeah. So if you think of the story of, Steve Jobs talks about the fact of when he went to college, he ended up being in a class doing a subject on calligraphy, right? kind of know it wasn't part, but he was kind of interested. He had an aesthetic flair about it. And many years later, when they were creating the fonts for the style for Apple, that's where it came into play, right? But who would have known that link?
Yeah, definitely.
So sometimes I think as human beings, we also need to embrace and embark on different journeys and think, well, what do I learn from it?